A massive decision yesterday by the United States Supreme Court to aid and abet the invasion of the United States of America. I'd like to get a reaction to this from somebody who knows a lot more about the law than I do. Joining us now is Ken Cuccinelli. He's a senior fellow for Homeland Security and Immigration at the Center for Renewing America and a former deputy secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump. Sir, good to have you back with us. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Now,
someday
Ken,
we're going to talk about a win.
I hope we do. I really do. I saw this yesterday, and as I've been noting, there was no opinion attached to this decision by the court, but I did see that the people who dissented, and among them were Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. And I realized instantly what side of the argument I'm on. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, it ain't over. The fact that there was no opinion kind of tells you that. They sort of, I read this as erring on the side of federal supremacy for the duration of the case. They said, okay, federal government, what this is about is cutting razor wire. You can do that until as the case goes on. Because all of this, remember, Vince, is preliminary. They haven't reached the merits of the case. In fact, today, the Center for Renewing America, where I'm a senior fellow working on immigration issues, we filed an amicus brief in the Fifth Circuit, which is considering the underlying case on an expedited basis. They're going to have oral argument in February. So we get another shot at this. It is the wrong decision, in my view, by the Supreme Court, but it isn't a final decision.
Right.
And we believe that this should simply be decided that giving Texas the power to police their own border. And if the federal government wants to also police our border finally after 3 years, they're welcome to join them. But interfering with it is not something that is appropriate.
But the federal government
that's how it'll end up.
The federal government is destroying Texas state property in the service of doing something that I think, by my reading, maybe I'm wrong, is unconstitutional. Because the federal government has a constitutional obligation to protect Texas against invasion, not aid and abet one. In fact, you and I have talked about that very issue.
Yes, no, you're correct. That is, of course, not how the federal government casts what they are doing, even though they are destroying property by cutting the wire, but they give a different purpose that seems more in line with their constitutional responsibilities, is while states, under the very end of Article 1, Section 10, have the power to defend themselves from invasion with nobody's permission, including the federal government. The federal government also, under Article 4, Section 4, has the responsibility of defending all the states against invasion. Now, we all know they're not doing that. That's part of the reason the founders left the states with this authority, so that when the federal government either wasn't around or chose not to do its job, the states would have the authority to protect themselves. It's just self-defense. That's all it is. And I believe the Fifth Circuit will find that Texas does have that authority and that it'll go back up to the Supreme Court, and at least Amy Coney Barrett, if not Chief Justice Roberts as well, will ultimately join the merits opinion when it's fully briefed and when the full case is before them.
So I hope you're right about that, but I'm concerned about that outcome because, like, normally, if as you go through a court process like this, you had an injunction issued by the Fifth Circuit against the federal government from breaking these border barriers. And yesterday, the Supreme Court vacated that injunction and said, no, you can keep breaking the barriers. Doesn't that kind of indicate that they think that Texas is going to lose on the merits, or at least that it's a jump ball right now? Because my impression is that normally a court would keep in place an injunction where they think that that side would likely succeed on the merits, right?
So remember that at the preliminary stage, you have heightened burdens. So that's why I don't view this as predicting the final outcome with any certainty. I take some heart in the fact that there are 4 justices who, even with the heightened burden brought on by preliminary injunction structure and process and requirements,
right,
are already there. So on the full merits hearing, they don't there isn't as high a burden for Texas to prove to exercise its own constitutional protections.
Okay.
And so I think there's a real chance of getting more justices once that process plays itself out.
Yes.
And I also mentioned, I would point out, they didn't issue an opinion. I don't really feel like there's a strong feeling on the part of the 5 that allowed the Border Patrol to continue to cut through Texas property. And I would note, this doesn't stop Texas from returning people to Mexico, from having their DPS, Department of Public Safety, block people from entering Texas from Mexico. It doesn't address any of those things, which Texaco is attempting to do now.
It doesn't.
Texas, not Texaco.
Texaco. Texas, different thing. But my impression is that Texas is still able to put up as much barbed wire, concertina wire as they want. It's just the court said it is okay for the feds to destroy it if they like.
That's right, and that may be odd. It is. I think that is a result of the natural tendency of the Supreme Court to expect federal supremacy. And the problem with that here is, and your listeners, many of them are in their cars, when they get home, look at Article 1, the very last paragraph. States have war powers without congressional permission when they're actually invaded. Now, that doesn't mean they should use tanks and planes, and Texas isn't doing that. They're just using barbed wire and people. That's it. But that is their exercise of their war powers to repel the invasion that is happening at our southern border.
Right.
Greg Abbott is the commander-in-chief of Texas, and he has the authority to do that under the U.S. Constitution.
By the way, he should be at home in Texas, right, and not in India right now? That seems like a bad place to be, given.
Nice, yes, under the circumstances.
I think so. I mean, he's an obligation to the people of his state. He should be there with them.
Still has the authority. The most important thing, though, let's not kid ourselves, is that he exercised his legal authority to defend the border. And I've advocated for him to defend it much more vigorously than he has. They haven't, for example, been returning people to Mexico. They can do that using the prisoner of war authority under the war power of the Constitution that Texas has to repel this invasion. They should be more robust in doing that. I don't mean using higher forms of force. I mean using more legal tools. So
where should Texas take this next when it comes to the federal government? Should they just keep laying out concertina wire and challenging the Biden administration to demonstrate its callous disregard for our borders? Should they? I said at the outset, maybe they should sort of test all of the constitutional questions here and actually put a Border Patrol agent under arrest for destroying state property and see where it goes from there. What do you think Texas should do now?
Yeah, I think they should exercise every option. I hate to see that last one because I would say that a Border Patrol agent with a Supreme Court ruling, if what they're arrested for is cutting the wire when the Supreme Court has allowed that, their qualified immunity would leave them walking on day one. So I don't think that's your test case. I do agree with you that every other aspect of this should be taken. And look, part of the reason we filed the amicus brief today is we are dissatisfied with the vigor with which Texas is arguing its constitutional authority to defend its own border. Greg Abbott has had to have been dragged kicking and screaming to using this authority that has been so obvious and in front of him all along. And frankly, Texas used this for decades and decades and decades to defend the border, and no one ever said boo. No one complained. The Texas Rangers would go into Mexico to protect the Texas border, which they have the authority to do when the state is being invaded. And that doesn't mean a foreign army. We're being invaded by people from outside this country, and that's all it takes to trigger that authority.
I will say one thing that Texas should definitely do is capture on camera every time the Border Patrol is compelled by DHS to break open these barriers. Because the American people deserve to see who's actually opening the border up to an invasion. It is the Biden administration explicitly.
So today, Peter Doocy was asking John Kirby, a spokesman for the administration, so you say you're doing everything you can to secure the border, but you're cutting Texas's barbed wire to open the border. What say you? And, it's nothing but there's no question, as you said earlier, Vince, that what the administration here is doing is not in pursuit of securing the border. It is in pursuit of opening the border. Plain and simple. There's no two ways about it.
So
there's no other reason to do it.
There were statements released by Texas yesterday, and you've kind of already made the point that you think Texas can be more vigorous in defending our borders and specifically their state's border. And I saw Ken Paxton put out a statement yesterday, the Attorney General, saying that this fight is not over, and I look forward to defending our state's sovereignty. Additionally, Greg Abbott's office did release a statement. He said this is not over. Texas's razor wire is an effective deterrent to the illegal crossings Biden encourages. I will continue to defend Texas's constitutional authority to secure the border and prevent the Biden administration from destroying our property. What are these? Go ahead. I think you're answering the question I was about to ask. What do you make of these statements?
Yeah, they sound tough. You know, Operation Lone Star was put in place in March of 2021. And what did they do? They stood tough-looking guys on the border. And what did they do? They watched people walk right by them, and they didn't do a single thing to impede them. They never name it Operation, we're going to stand there and put these tough, cool Texas-sounding names, Operation Lone Star. Come on. We don't care about the name. We care about actually defending the border. It has taken Greg Abbott over 2 years. It took the end of Title 42 for him to even start attempting to defend the border in any meaningful way. One thing that could happen in Washington as we're having a money debate in the Capitol is they could give Texas the dollars that they might otherwise give to DHS if Texas is actually going to defend the border, given that DHS is actively working to open the border under Joe Biden.
It's. Do you think Greg Abbott should keep busing illegals across our country, or are we well past that being a good idea?
No, I think he should, and this is an area where I can say that I was wrong early on. I objected to this.
Me too.
Because it is human trafficking, and my position was I oppose Joe Biden doing it, so I need to oppose everybody else doing it. But the reality is it has opened the eyes of Democrats in some of the bluest parts of this country, Democrat cities, and I don't have to rattle them off to you. You've talked about them many times,
right,
that are screaming bloody murder. Of course, they blame Republicans, and they come up with every excuse they possibly can think of not to blame Joe Biden. But America gets it. America understands.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'd like to see, you mentioned some pictures. I think we should show more pictures of the New York shelters where they build for these folks, the schools they kick school kids out of to house illegal aliens.
Well, the Biden administration has been, and many of these Democrat mayors, they are preventing cameras from even seeing what's going on behind the curtains.
Can you imagine if I had done that as the deputy secretary at DHS, if we didn't let people into Border Patrol facilities, AOC's outside crying, you know, that bull crap that she pulled.
Yeah.
We can see from the Biden time, she never meant it. Neither did anyone on her team. It's all pure political theater. And the whole open borders thing, when you combine it with election bills like H.R. 1, where they're trying to dump non-citizens on the voter rolls by the millions, this is part of a bigger strategy for the radical left. And Joe Biden is a willing tool of it.
Big time. Okay, Ken, lastly, before I let you go, I do want to ask you one political question. It's New Hampshire primary day.
Sure.
But you created a PAC to support Ron DeSantis' candidacy, Never Back Down.
Yeah.
And, of course, DeSantis' campaign has come to a conclusion. Do you have any plans for the PAC? Will we see it retooled in a way, either to help the Trump candidacy, or is there some other purpose for the PAC now?
No, that was the purpose the PAC was formed to achieve, and we're going to have a long wind down. That's the nature of the beast with these things. We still have to deal with all of our compliance complaints people file based on newspaper articles. We still have to deal with them, even though they're frivolous. So we have a lot of wind down work to do. The purpose of that PAC was to support Ron DeSantis' run for president. I hope he runs again in the future. I think he is the best conservative chief executive that anyone alive and listening to you and me right now has ever seen on issue after issue. And I think that kind of leadership would be spectacular for America. That's why I supported him in his race for the presidency. He didn't see a path forward. I agree with him that Donald Trump has really not got the votes yet, but he's locked up enough of the hearts and minds of the Republican electorate for states that are going to vote early enough that by the end of Super Tuesday, mathematically, this will be over. And I don't see any path to diverting that. Nikki Haley never had a path to the nomination. She cannot appeal to people who prefer an updated Republican vision that's focused on the American worker and regular folks instead of corporate elites. She's still stuck in the early 2000s. I kept thinking of the Romney Obama. The early 2000s have called asking for their Republican, and Nikki is here to serve that up.
She
so,
is.
That's how that'll play out. Obviously, you can just compare the time setting COVID aside for both presidents because they both did badly at COVID, Trump and Biden. But if you set that aside where they both did badly, America did a whole lot better under Trump than it's done under Biden. And I think that's basically going to be the whole campaign.
Big time.
But I do also think there may be the most significant third-party effort you've ever seen because of the polling that shows that a majority of voters would prefer not to see this rematch.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
But that'll play out.
But I think
it's gonna be an interesting year.
I agree with you on Ron DeSantis. He's a great American, and I'm so glad he's on our side. And he still has a great future ahead for sure. Thank you very much, Ken Cuccinelli. Good to talk to you as always, sir.
Good to be with you as always.
All right.